Okay, great. Cool. So I hope you're all still awake and ready for the final talk of the first session. Then afterwards, you're going to be released into lunch. I hope you're not too hungry yet, but lunch is coming. And now let me introduce our last speaker of the session, Modestha Mensah. Welcome back home. It's a little homecoming for you here. So Modestha, in 2023, she was a guest scientist here at the Bonn Sustainable AI Lab and the Institution for Science and Ethics under the Argelanda Scholarship, which brings researchers from Ghana to Germany. Here at the lab, she researched the intersection between sustainable AI and feminist African ethics. Currently, Modestha is a PhD candidate at the University of Ghana, and the title of her thesis is A Critical Study of Personhood in Akan Thought, a Feminist Perspective. She obtained both her Bachelor of Arts, English and Philosophy, and Masters of Philosophy degrees at the University of Cape Coast, Ghana, where she now works as a lecturer. Modestha specializes in African socio-political philosophy, ethics, and critical thinking. Her research interests are in AI ethics, and feminist reinterpretations of African philosophical thought systems. Modestha will give her presentation now on African feminist decolonial perspectives of AI ethics. So Modestha, we are so happy to have you back here for this talk. And yes.
Hi, I'm so excited to be back, to see all of you. It's a good feeling. When I was here, of course, this talk will be more concerned, closely related to the research I did before I left. So for those of you who may have heard some of it, it's okay, pardon me. I'm looking at African feminist decolonial perspective of AI ethics. And I'm going to start off from where Faustino, the Brazilian... Faustino, yeah. Great presentation, where he left off. He said that you cannot mathematicize social experiences, human experiences. You just can't do that. And it seems that is what artificial intelligence is doing. And so we want to have that conversation. And in this... My first scene looks like the map is turned upside down. It's deliberate because today we are centering on global south. So the global south is up there, and we're focusing on what our experiences are, what our concerns are as far as AI ethics is concerned. So from that perspective, of course, the general outline of my talk will be introduction. I answer some questions. Exactly what am I saying? So what, in terms of why is it important? Now what? That being, what do I recommend? What do I think can be done? So in the what, I talk about AI and Africa. The so what, I talk about the environmental impact of AI in Africa. The now what, I look at African ecofeminist ethical pathways that can help to maybe mitigate the problems of AI, artificial intelligence technology on the African continent, then some conclusions. So because the workshop is a decolonial reconstruction of of AI ethics, I'm using this decolonial framework and understanding it as dismantling of relations of power, conceptions of knowledge that foment the reproduction of racial, gender, geopolitical hierarchies that come into being or found new and more powerful forms of expression in the modern colonial world. So I take it from Maldonado, Torres 2021. And from this decolonial perspective, now we want to shift the whole focus of looking at the world from a Western dominant perspective of rational approaches to existence, rational approaches to ethics, and now look at relationality. And in relationality, we're looking at the world, looking at existence as coexistence, as interdependent, embedded actually in a web of relationships, in a web of connections, interconnections, interdependencies. So we're not looking at the world and the human being who is trying to appreciate the world as somebody who is separated from the reality, but we're looking at the world as a group of people inhabiting a planet where they are connected with one another. Everything they do actually cannot be separated from the objects and the subject. And I'm taking a cue, the foundation from African communitarian view we heard from Samuel, The previous speaker also spoke mostly about it in some way. So yes, so I'm looking at this relationality from an African communitarian perspective, where, as far as reality is concerned, I'm using the human being as a focus. Your existence, your reality, your being actually is intertwined with the reality of the people around you, of the community you belong to. So we have this aphorism credited to this in BT. He says, I am because we are. And because we are, therefore I am. The previous speaker in the morning said something about you become a person through other persons, your relationship with other persons. So this is how we are approaching the world. And so with this kind of ontological view about the world, what will be the ethics of it? The ethics of it will be centering concrete lived experiences of people, especially people in the marginalized world, which is the majority world, focusing not only on Africans, but African women in the AI discourse, especially because my relationship with the Institute was more about ecological issues, so I'm looking at it from the ecological perspective. So we're looking at relationality in terms of what the lived experiences are, all the things that I've been speaking about, of course, are realities that are ongoing, but they look like they're up there. They're on the macro level. I'm looking at the everyday life experiences of people, of Africans, of African women, and what this AI technology is doing to those experiences. That is my contribution to the debate. So so what is AI ethics? The literature says that it's simply about the issues that face social, political issues that face developers, practitioners, consumers, civil society, as far as AI technology is concerned. And the issues have been categorized into several branches. So we have the human-centered, whether there's privacy in terms of AI development, the data that is accumulated, the algorithms. We have some that are bordering on supervision. So how is this data sourced, for example? Somebody mentioned garbage in, garbage out. That's also a term I learned here. And we're also looking at impact of AI on society. So the supply chain, which I'm sure Sophia has been working on, regulatory policies and so on. And then there's a bit of the environment. I'll talk about that later because that's my focus. Of course, the machine itself, a deception by the design, the monoculture involved. And we also have organizations in terms of power concentration, the power dynamics between the producers and the consumers. So this is generally what the issues that have been discussed in AI ethics. And my concern, my interest is more on the environmental, in the sense that yes, when we talk about AI ethics, we're talking about all these issues that affect the human society. But what about the environment that houses human beings? Are we too important to neglect the environment that we depend on? Or are we thinking that, well, as human beings, we dominate, we exploit, we bend things to our will, things must serve us, and so, well, the environment must serve us? That is the focus that I am coming from. So in this sense, what is the relationship between AI and Africa? When we are talking about AI ethics in the previous slide, when we're talking about AI, social issues, political issues that face developers, consumers, civil society, as far as AI development is concerned, usually we don't talk about the material development of the technology. By the material development, we mean the physical infrastructure that houses, that holds AI operations. So the data centers, for example, the devices that the AI technologies run on, the digital small ones, the cooling system, the data centers, how information or data is collected, how the algorithms are done, they are all done on a material infrastructure. And these materials have to come from somewhere. And this is the relationship that is mostly African societies are mostly intimately connected with, because most of these mineral resources are coming, most of them, not all of them, I admit, are coming from the African continent. So that is something we don't look at because we don't think about it. We are just enjoying the products that we have, the things it's doing for us, and we're forgetting that the infrastructure itself is coming from somewhere. So what are the conditions of these sourcing of infrastructure, materials for the infrastructure? That is one thing that I look at. I also look at, of course, when you're developing AI, you're talking about how you're labeling your data, how you're collecting the data, the various tech companies that are involved in that. Once that is also done, we're also looking at how the devices themselves, because definitely they become obsolete at some point in time. You don't use them perpetually, they're artificial, so they become obsolete at a certain point in time. So what do you do with it? When the computer is obsolete, what do you do with it? When the air conditioner is obsolete, what do you do with it? The chips you use for the data center, the cooling, the water, everything, what do you do with those materials? They have to end up somewhere. So the disposal of AI materials, or the total AI material edifice, has to end up somewhere. Now, at these levels, at these three levels, there is a close interconnection or intersection between colonial legacies, gender, and the impacts of this on the environment. So let's see. Let's talk about the sourcing of materials. A study shows that Africa is contributing about 80% of materials such as cobalt, such as lithium, such as platinum group of metals, magnesium, and so on and so forth. And these are very critical, very necessary to the electronic devices that these AI products operate on. Without this material infrastructure, you cannot have AI. And these are mainly sourced from Africa. So this is Congo, where cobalt now is in vogue, is really demanded. And as you can see, these are the working conditions of the people there. So somebody was talking about colonialism and violence. Yes, you have to extract the material. You can't do it softly. You can't do it gently. There is civil war because everybody wants to own the territory so that they can mine more and export and make money off it. There are children, there are of course men, women, children, and this is the condition under which they work to get the minerals for the material edifice. Now, quite apart from that, we also have the data centers where the materials that are used to build the electronic devices themselves, once you collect your algorithms, you do your labeling, you need data centers to store, to house these data that you have collected. And it's not only in Europe. Now we are having, the presenters have mentioned all these African centers that are springing up so that they're also contributing to the AI conversation, the AI technology worldwide. We have most of them also springing up on the African continent. And what is happening is that on the world stage, we are hearing that the number of, or the quantity of carbon emissions that storing data takes, operating data on these devices, interacting with generative AI, how much carbon that is produced. I read a study that said that, for example, the ChatGTP, I mean, that's more current, so I can use that. ChatGTP, I think 3, for example, the pre-transformative 3 software or hardware that houses ChatGPT 3 uses about, is it 300,000 pounds of carbon dioxide. And when you quantify that, it looks like it's more like powering a vehicle. We all know how vehicles operate, like 5 vehicles across their entire lifetime. That is how much power that these material edifices produce, how much carbon dioxide these material edifices produce. And it is affecting the climate. Now there's heat wave in various parts of the world, Africa not excluded. There is flooding, there is drought because of this, not only because of carbon dioxide, but of course partly contributed by the carbon emissions. And Africa being a continent that is not as well resourced to adapt well to climate problems, we are also following suit. We're also committing the same problems. We're also making the same mistakes of course, we also want to progress. We also want to develop our own technologies. So we're also setting up centers to produce AI products, of course, for the good. But these problems are there. The carbon emissions are going to increase, add on to the global ones that are produced. So we ourselves, we're suffering it more, but we're also contributing to the problem. So that is part of the development. And we also have a situation where, as I was saying, the material edifice of AI technology, when they go obsolete, they need to end up somewhere. So this is Ghana. Why? Oh, she told me not to touch. Sorry. I forgot. So this is Ghana, where I come from. And what you see there is an electronic dump site. And that is Lagos. And I took these two because they are the two most largest dump sites in the world for electronic waste. But what I mean by electronic waste is the computers, the electronic devices, the chips, the monitors, the air conditioners, all material things that you can think of for digitalization, of course, and AI end up. These are the two largest, right? And what happens is that they burn the object, to get useful metal from them. So as you can see, it's open fire. So you burn it, you get useful metal, you sell it. If the machine itself is a bit usable, then that is even better. You can now, in your own home, own a computer, own an air conditioner. Of course, ones that are not working elsewhere, but now you also have the privilege of enjoying cool temperature in your room. So that is on the side. But on the other side of more environmental impact, you have this open burning ongoing. And as you can see, it's mostly children that do this, and women. Of course, where the children are, the women will be there, their mothers are there, right? And this is disposal of e-waste. Now, what is the problem? I was going to touch it. So let's look at the distribution of electronic waste, for example, globally. As you can see on the map, Americans produce what we have there, and this was as at 2019, right? Europe, Asia, Africa. Well, Africa is less than 9%. So, of course, the largest is coming from Europe, America, and Asia, of course, with Europe leading. And you see on the map the amount of capital waste that is distributed across the continent. So that is where the waste end up. And the down there you have how they're categorized. So these electronic devices, what they are. So, for example, small equipment, large equipment, temperature exchange equipment, screens, small IT. So all that has been done, and of course it's referenced. Now, this is how Africa is involved, at least on the material development side level, with artificial intelligence. So what? With this information, what? Now, this is the so what. The so what is that, of course, this involvement has a huge impact on the environment, on the African environment. And that African environment and the environmental degradation that happens has closely connected to colonialism and gender. And this is why. Of course, colonialism as a historical event was a situation where certain Western powers felt that they needed to expand their market. Well, there have been several reasons given, but I think this is a real one. To expand their market. So you see the continent of Africa, you sit in Berlin, you put the continent of Africa on the map, partition it, and then you distribute it among world powers. So Germany, Belgium, France, UK, Britain, Portugal. I'm not looking at you, I'm just saying Portugal. Italy, I think. Yeah, you're not Portuguese. And so, they go to this continent and try to get what they can to build their industries, to make their societies better. And what happens is that because this continent, previously before the coming of these Europeans, because this continent is not one people, because you're living in small communities, small kingdoms with their own various governance styles, their own cultural practices, beliefs, their own identity differences, languages, of course, several languages. What happens is you put all of them together and you divide them. Now you have people with different governance styles, people with different cultural beliefs, people with, of course, different mineral resources, and you're putting all of them together to serve a certain market. So it is exploitative by nature, it's capitalist by nature, and the idea is this: we are superior. We have it's an imperialist event. You believe that you have this superior power, superior culture, and so you go and you take what you want to enrich yourself, to make your society better. Now, that has ended physically. But what is happening now, which is the coloniality that we're talking about today, is that there are structures still in place that still feed the system, that still ensure that the overall extraction from Africa to feed those industries is still ongoing. So whether it's material, whether it's power, whether it's politics, whether it's governance, any form of power relations is still the same. We have superior, powerful societies, powerful technology companies taking from the less powerful societies with less powerful technologies. And what happens is that because this African continent is built, of course, the inception of it is to export. It's still happening. You can hardly in most African countries see anything that does not involve extractivism, because that is how the economy is structured. So you try to diversify, you try to industrialize, but the foundations are still the same. It is meant to export. So we still have that going on. And of course, with colonialism also, there is an issue of dominance. And in the gender perspective, we are looking at how dominant, how powerful people try to dominate others on the basis of class, on the basis of race, on the basis of gender. And that same attitude is transported to how we interact with the environment. So as human beings, we assume this chauvinist attitude that the environment should bend to our will, should serve us. And so we take from it what we can get. And there have been arguments that this has some strong connections with Christian, Judeo-Christian religions, with early modern philosophy, where we are ushering the society into the scientific world. And so we are making the human being and human flourishing the center. Aristotelian and Platonian philosophy, of course, the center of the event. So everything must enhance human flourishing. That same attitude is also in the sense of the gender perspective. This is the structure of society, where powerful groups, patriarchal societies, of course, see the otherless, women, children, all other marginalized groups as the other, and so must be dominated. So the argument here is that the way we treat ourselves in society, which is other and me, and the dominance that we kind of project, is the same way we are treating the environment. And of course, that is ending up in what you see, the destruction of the environment as you see it on both other continents, but especially on the African continent. So how is this environmental degradation happening? Let's look at e-waste, for example. So I'm going to put them together. So the electronic disposal, electronic waste disposal, mining, I'm going to put all of them together. But in e-waste, for example, as we can see, so this is the process I was trying to explain. So you have the electronic devices. If they are repairable, they go to the repair shops. Of course, most of them are not repairable. So they end up on the dump site, and then it's burned for the useful material to be sought out, of course, exchanged for some capital. Now, what happens with this process is that, of course, these materials have very heavy metal, very toxic substances, and they not only pollute the land, which the people live on, because most African countries are agrarian societies. So they're either into agriculture or they're mining as their source of livelihood. So you're not only polluting the land, the water bodies, the air, of course, and then the surrounding populations go through this. So these are some of the effects that have been identified from e-waste disposal. So if issues on the central nervous system, respiratory, digestive, renal, cardiovascular, reproductive, endocrine, I don't need to go through them. So like this is how dangerous the whole practice is. But so you wonder, don't the people know? I mean, are you not experiencing the effects? Why are you still doing it? Well, they have to survive. They have to eat. And this is probably long term, but their survival is short term, it's immediate. You have to meet your material conditions first. So I mean, yeah, this will come later, we'll deal with it. But this is serious, right? Now that is just e-waste. What happens also is that with the e-waste, of course, the land is destroyed. And even though it's affecting African people in general, we're saying it affects African women more because they are mostly impacted by any form of environmental crisis or climate change and anything related to the environment. Because in terms of agriculture, for various reasons, because of their care duties, because of their lack of education, of course, technical education, because they are responsible for the home, they are the bulk of labor in the agricultural sector. They're doing the sowing, they're doing the harvesting, they're doing the pruning, they're doing the seed. They have the seeds that you use to cultivate all the various food produce. So they are major role players in food production, especially domestic food production. Now, they're also responsible. So this is firewood. For those of you who understand what this is firewood. So these are women carrying firewood to their homes, to warm up their homes, to provide food, and if there's surplus to sell for money, for their livelihoods. And of course, this is so because unlike Europe or the West, we still depend a lot on the environment. We don't have so much luxury of enjoying gas that you do in other continents. So most of the society still depend on firewood. Of course, firewood is transformed into different things, mostly coal, so what you call charcoal. I don't know if you know that is black substance. We use that. Okay, you do. Good. And I'm going to find some for you to see. So it's burned, and then you have a charcoal, and then you use that to generate heat, to cook. And this is what most houses, I mean, I consider myself as privileged, so I have gas, but I still use charcoal because gas is really expensive because, of course, the state doesn't take care of you the way that the state takes care of other people at other places of the world because, of course, the formation of the state itself was to serve a particular colonialist purpose. So that taking care of my people is not yet growing to the state that it should. So you take care of yourself from health, from feeding, from accommodation. So yes, I can afford gas, but it's very expensive. So for things that would take longer to cook, I use coal. And this is where this is where it comes from. These women, they are about 80% of the people responsible for gathering this wood for this coal, right? And water. It is women who are responsible for water. Water is life, right? You need water in your home. Water storages, yeah, you have that here, but in Africa it's different. So you are responsible for making sure that there is at least potable water in your home for cooking, for domestic use, etc. And it is the women who are in charge. The gender roles ensure that it's the women who are responsible for providing this potable water in their homes. And then also, of course, access to land. To have a livelihood, land is very important in most African communities. It's like a major economic resource. The more land you have, the more capital and power you have. And it's already disadvantageous because due to some cultural reasons, due to, of course, power relations, women already have very limited access to land. Because, of course, another thing in most African communities is that the land is owned communally, right? And so a family or a group or a clan, if you know what clan is, they own the lands, but these lands are supervised by heads of each family. The heads are men. Traditionally, they're supposed to be men. So if, as a woman, of course, you live with your father, you live with your brother, eventually, assuming you marry, you live with your husband. So you don't need to have your own land. The men will have the land to take care of you. So you don't own the land. And land is major economic resource. So there's already that limitedness there. But we also have a situation where, because of globalization, of course, greener pastures and everything, we have the men moving from rural communities to urban communities, of course, to make a better living for the family, which usually is not achieved, by the way. And what happens is that there is an increment on the burden of the women to take care of the family. So even though most African countries are patriarchal, you have families that are actually run by women because they are now providing for the family, because the husbands are away trying to make more, ends meet to come take care of the families back home. So this is the dependency. And of course, as the environmental degradation goes on and people are sick, people are maimed, people become vulnerable because of probably inhaling poisonous substances, ingesting poisonous foods and whatever, they still need to be taken care of by people. And it's usually women who are in charge of the caring duties. So they are themselves suffering the consequences of all forms of degradation, and they are as well taking care of the people who are suffering these consequences. This is how closely impacted most African women are about any form of environmental degradation. So now what? What should we do? This is Professor Mathai Wangari, you know her. And I have this professor because I didn't find her while I was here. I found her recently. And she's been doing, well, she's passed. She did so much work on environmental conservation. She's actually the first Black person or Black woman, I'm not sure, to win a African, great, thank you, African to win a Nobel Prize. This was just in 2004. Yes, African woman, okay, to win that kind of prestigious prize because of her work in environmentalism, environmental conservation. And what was she doing? She was making the point that I made before, the intersections between colonialism, gender, and environmental degradation. That, look, as it stands now, African women are the most impacted by any form of environmental degradation. That's the truth. There is no debate about that. But we are treating the environment the way we treat marginalized groups, by dominating nature, exploiting nature, getting what we want from it, without thinking about the loss, without restoring what is lost. And so she was really championing this cause that we have to, as a people, be conscious of the impacts of the use of the environment to us, especially the loss and the danger that it can cause African societies, African women, if we lose our environment. And so she had like really great initiatives, like planting trees, billions of trees since she started this movement. And now what I want to add to this is that if we're looking at African ecofeminist ethical pathways to AI and the impact it has on ecology, coming back to the African ethical relational nature of ethics, which we mentioned so far, communitarian, other people call it Ubuntu, South African people call it Ubuntu. What are the issues? What are the lessons that we can learn from that framework? So in African ontology, our view of the world, our view of reality, yes, there is an existence of hierarchy. Reality really is about anything that has this vital force. I think Samuel mentioned this earlier. Anything that has a force that communicates with others in society is considered a reality. And as far as this force is concerned, there are hierarchies. Of course, others have it more, others are more powerful. So we have divine beings, we have human beings, we have natural environment, we have inanimate. But the point about it is this: all these come together to make the environment, both the divine, the human, the nature, and the inanimate objects. They are part of the environment. So it's androcentric, yes, it's anthropocentric rather, yes, it's the human being constructing this worldview, but it's less anthropocentric chauvinism in a way that this human being is considering herself as part of everything else. So your relationship with nature is one of mutual exchange, one of respect. So in very traditional African societies, for example, there are ways that you treat the environment. You don't fell trees anyhow. There are things you need to do. Of course, now things are changing, but there are rituals you need to perform. No human rituals, no. Just, things you do before you fell a tree. You don't do certain things to the river bodies. You don't just mine anywhere. There are things you do, and the point is that you want to conserve the environment because you are part, both you and the environment, including inanimate objects, are part of the human, the social space that you share. That is the point. This is the ontology. This is the understanding of reality. So in the ethics part, what are you trying to say? Well, yes, it's women who are traditionally in charge of conserving the environment, but you're conserving the environment with this mindset. We are telling the idea is to make people understand that you treat nature with respect, you treat nature with care, you treat nature as a community because you want to sustain harmony, you want to sustain interdependence. You can't do without the environment. Maybe the environment doesn't even need you. We need the environment more. We need nature more. So you have to go about your duties in a way that is showing respect, dignity, value for the environment. How does this translate to actual AI policies, actual AI ethical views? I don't know. These are just suggestions because, of course, I know that the morality of it is not as binding. Morality, ethics is not as binding as policy. So I'm just thinking that maybe for any policy that regulates any AI activity, it should be one that respects the environment. It's one that conserves, not destroys the environment. So that if whatever product you want to build or you want to generate, if it's going to end up doing more harm to the environment than good, it's cancelled. It's radical, but probably that's what we need. So that the aim is to conserve the environment. Do we need to stop mining? Amy, you're always saying this. Well, some people will suffer, but in the long run, if it's going to destroy the environment, which is going to impact the people that subsist in it, it should be rethought. And so, for example, also, of course, engaging local communities, because some people are arguing in the literature that, well, you can have AI actually helping to conserve the environment, because we have these AI tools that are able to predict flooding, able to predict droughts and all those. But the point is, how are these designed? The people that live within those communities, are they consulted? Because they know, but they experience these phenomena every day, like minute by minute. Are they consulted to get their perspective on how these technological solutions will work? It's usually bottom up. I'm suggesting that you do a top down. I'm suggesting that you do a bottom up approach to, even if you want to come up with AI tools that help conserve the environment, so that you engage in community people, especially the women, because they have the traditional knowledge of how to conserve the environment. They have traditional knowledge of biodiversity. They have traditional knowledge on seeds that, of course, produce food, because it's estimated that in Ghana, this is Ghana, not Africa, I think in 10 years, there will be farming. I don't know if that's what I heard. There will be farming in Ghana, for example. Why? Because the lands are lost. Now it's extraction. But these women have knowledge about how to conserve the environment, how to preserve the seeds so that you can produce, and so on and so forth. So these are some recommendations that I have. I'm still thinking about these. I'm pretty sure you give me more ideas before I leave today. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Modestha. Are there questions in the audience? Okay, there is one already.
I have a question. Where's the microphone? Well, that was awesome. Thank you for all those amazing thoughts, for weaving intersectional ideas together, and of course, enriching the amazing conversation coming out of Africa today. I was wondering, and I think this kind of came from a narrative that you shared about a woman's life and relationality to men. And you shared where you kind of grow up with your father, maybe you live with your brother, and then maybe your husband. And that kind of sparked something in my mind about queer African women. And if you've spent any time kind of conceptualizing where their role goes with this environmental degradation, as maybe it was previously conceived in previous forms of lifeways and whatnot, and kind of is conceived now. So I was kind of wondering if you've looked at this at all, if you've proposed any theories, or if you've had any chats with queer women on the African continent about how their perspectives could be revitalized within this conversation, or are being rejected due to multiple systems of oppression there. So yeah, that's my question.
Yes. This is, in fact, I was anticipating this question. No, it's not a mean question, no. Unfortunately, that's one of the limitations of my research. I'm working with, of course, guilty of the binaries, men, women, straight binaries. I have not looked at, the truth is I've not looked at queer women and other gender identity. I have not, but I can say something from my point of view. There's research that suggests that queer people, not even queer women alone, queer people who identify as women may be even more impacted than traditional women, because of course there is that cultural conceptions in African societies about gender identities, and as it stands now, it's not well developed to extend to queer people. So there's research that shows that yes, they are likely to be more impacted because of the kind of attitude that they will be faced with when probably there is environmental degradation, for example, and there's shelter for people who have been affected, or there are meetings where women are coming together to see how to mitigate the problem. There's research that suggests that, but like I said, this is not something that I have looked into professionally. So yeah, it's about time. I don't think it's deliberate. I've been avoiding it deliberately, but it's not something I'd considered. But yeah, I mean, I will look at it and see what's possible better frameworks that can include various groups. Because actually, if you're going typically by African traditions, everybody ought to be taken care of, whether queer or straight, whatever. Everybody ought to be taken care of, because the idea is that the principle is for social harmony. The principle is that we live in commune with others in the society. We are all connected in our everyday experiences. So technically, it should take care of them. But of course, technicalities, oughts are different from practices, right? So it's something that I would have to look at and think about how to deal with that issue. Thank you.
Do we have another question? Yes, quite a few. Your hand was the quickest, so. And then we have Wakanyi and where am I?
So great presentation. Also, I wanted to ask a question about the data centers, because you mentioned it slightly. Would it be okay if the big tech corps make sure that the data center is properly they ensure that it's sustainable? Because I know Google boasts of about 90% of renewable energy running close to about 10 of its data centers, or about 5 of its data centers, and about 67% of them are currently being sustainable in terms of renewable energy. And then it also has a plan for how it disposes or recycle its hard drives and all that. Okay. So would it be okay if they come up with that and let's say they get to a 90% sustainability score? Are we okay with that, or we are just gonna outrightly say okay, because they would still need to get more hard drives. They would still need to mine to be able to do that. I guess my question is, can we find a middle ground where
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Samuel, for your question. So the answer to this, yes and no. It's not straightforward. Yeah, it would be great if they could structure their centers in a way that the emissions are not as dangerous as they are currently. And so, of course, renewable energy will be good. So that will be great, so that it continues to run. But the other thing is, you need more material for that renewable energy. You need lithium, you need magnesium, you need, of course, more water. You need to build the wind panels, the solar energy, and all those, and you're still going to have to mine more. So it's yes and no. And so the problem is, so what do we do? Honestly, I don't know. Because, yeah, this is always the issue. What's the middle ground? Yeah, go more renewable. But of course, if your mining, if your extraction processes, if your disposal practices will not further exacerbate the problem, the effect, then that would be good. So maybe that could be you policy people, you technical people, how to, and that's not for me to think about. I'm the philosophy person to think about how to do that. But the point really is, well, if you're going renewable, well, you're still mining. And there's still effects of mining.
Thank you, Modestha, so much for your presentation. It was amazing. Thank you so much for invoking the spirit of Wangari Maathai. That's one of the most influential people in my life, actually. My question is around something you said towards the end on your recommendations, and I agree with you. It would be amazing to consult with indigenous women and people that hold traditional knowledge holders, but they really are not there. I work with a lot of indigenous communities in Africa and around the world, and this is a diminishing group of people. So it's a bit dreamy for me to imagine that there will be a time that we could look to that. That's kind of a gone era. So how do you propose a forward-looking consultation, where we maybe use the power of technology to digitize or figure out a way of bringing that indigenous knowledge system into the formal education systems? I guess this is more of a question and a recommendation at the same time. Rather than imagine that there will come a time, because we don't have time, rather than imagine that there will come a time when the minds of the policymakers and the technology, people that are backing up this technology would be interested to invest in indigenous, women who are also quite marginalized, don't have access to the language, don't have access to education as we have, right? And perhaps are not also interested in being part of that conversation. So how do we, in a way, it kind of builds on Samuel's question, how do we meet somewhere halfway? This is a very interesting space that we find ourselves. It's a conundrum, On the one hand, there's the extraction going on, but at the same time, there are those that sit on that land that is being extracted upon. So how do we meet halfway somehow?
So thank you for your question. I would want to ask a follow-up, so that the indigenous, of course, you're talking from your experience, the indigenous women are not there. I just want to think, are they not there, or are they not availing themselves? Because sometimes, too, there are some cultural limitations that prevent women, traditional indigenous women, from coming out to share their knowledge, their experience. Probably timing of consultation, for example, because of course they have these domestic duties that they have to take care of in their family. So the timing that you use to consult them, is it favorable for them to be available to share, assuming they're there and they're hiding? I'm just assuming. Or, for example, are they comfortable sitting with, are there men in these groups? Are they comfortable sitting with the men to express their views? Because those things still happen. They're so used to the traditional system that says, well, as a woman, you keep quiet for the man. He's the knowledge holder. So if they are there, will she speak? She may not speak. So I'm just wondering, if there are actually reasons why the indigenous women are not there or are not revealing themselves to contribute to these conservation methodologies. But on the other side, assuming they're actually not there, they are just dying out, these indigenous knowledge is just dying out. What do we do? Well, of course, technology still comes in. I'm running away from technology, but of course, it still comes in handy. And that is why codification, documentation is really important because, of course, like you may be aware, most of our indigenous knowledge systems are orally transmitted, right? They're not really codified elsewhere. So if we can have, using technology to codify these indigenous knowledge, so you go to communities, talk to them, gather data, codify them, use of your AI technologies, well, that could help. That could help. But I kind of think that you need both. You need both. You can't use technology as a sole solution to this problem because, of course, this is a problem that has to do with social phenomena, right? And if you're going to use AI to automate them, to use them to solve problems, how reflective, how representative will these automations be to the reality of the knowledge itself? How much representation are you getting if you are using technology? Because as we have said, technology it's not possible that it will capture the full reality. So I think both. Please try and find them. Consider the timing of the consultation, consider who is around. Yeah, that's just what I think for now.
And we have the next question.
Yeah, well, thank you for the presentation. And you kind of already answered my question because I was thinking about the feasibility of one of your recommendations about engaging with the women. So you kind of already answered that. But maybe just to build a little bit on the discussions, where do you think maybe the intersectionality lens would come in here? Because when you say African women, it's not also like a homogeneous group, right? So there would be different social categories, identities. Yeah, for example, the gender identity, genderqueer women, trans women, and also able-bodied women, also education, financial status as well. So taking all those into account, how do you think there could be like a point where different diverse group of diverse kinds of perspectives can be put forward in these discussions? So
okay, so thank you. Yeah, for that recognition that, of course, there are different classes of women. I'm sure that's what you're talking about. Different categories of women, class, of course, age, able-bodied, disability, queer, and all that. That's true. But because it's an ethics that is centering, marginalized group, the focus is marginalized group. Yes, women generally in the marginalized group, but even in the women category, there will be a larger marginalized group who will not be rich women, who will not be straight women, who will not be able-bodied women, and they're still in the majority. So true, the women will not have similar needs, but still the majority who form marginalized group will have these common concerns that these consultations I'm talking about, these suggestions that I'm making, will still come from. So yeah, it still works. Of course, there are some dynamics, but the crux of the matter is that yes, there's the marginalized groups are still in the majority. So it may not affect, it may not concern, for example, a woman of power. It may not concern an able-bodied woman. It may not concern a straight woman, but they're really in the minority. So, yeah.
I've been keeping track of questions that came up right in the beginning. So there was one more, then we have you, and I'm not sure we have time for all of you. Already have the mic. If you keep it short and you also, then we can maybe go through all of the questions before lunch. We'll try.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Modestha, for a very insightful presentation, and thank you for putting a smile on my face as you showed Wangari Maathai. She is she's a role model for me, and she always used to assimilate nature to a feminine image, and then to capitalism and this culture of consumption to a male image. Hence the notion of chauvinism and destroying mother nature and taking and taking. My question to you is, how do you think African feminist perspective, decolonial perspective that you just spoke about so impactfully, how do you think they can reshape AI ethics, but in order to address the unique cultural, social, and economic challenges faced by African women, and not forgetting the fact that when we talk about African women, there's this non-homogeneity aspect of it. You have the disabled, you have the ones who are not as privileged as the others. You have the rural woman, you have the educated. Like, how do you now debunk that in order to address with your feminist decolonial perspective and AI ethics, but to address this kind of like challenges faced by all women in Africa? Thank you.
This is, how did you term those questions? Mean questions. It's not a mean question. This is a challenging question because it's a problem. Like solving an issue that affects a group of people who have various different interests. So that is a big challenge. That is a big problem. I admit it's not easy. But what do we do? I think these conversations are important. So today we're doing this, bringing not Western and European values to the fore. So I am an academic, for example, of African feminists who are academics. I'll speak as an academic. Have conversation. I always say that it's not about the professors, it's not about the women in high positions. It's really about the majority of women who are average women, rural women who actually experience this more than probably I would. So have conversation. The consultation, for example, because of course we cannot influence big AI ethics. No, not now, not in a very long time. But so maybe at the community level, academics doing community consultations, for example, what are the ways that these small communities can recover, conserve their environment, that in that so it's context-based, right? So that in that specific community, that problem is solved. We cannot generalize, we cannot give one solution that will solve the problem on a general scale. That is really very difficult to do. So I will always talk about localizing the problem, contextualizing the problem. So at the level of communities, so that at least if we're dealing with problems at the community level and we can have unions that will now make input into larger civil society debates, then it goes up from there. So down, up. But to sit up here and say, this is the way that will solve all women's problems, I cannot. I'm very deceptive if I say that I can give such a solution, because it's, of course, contextual.
Okay, very quick last question.
Oh, I was talking too much.
Okay, very, very quick, and then we all go to lunch.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm pretty new in this field, so maybe my question is a little bit naive, but I was wondering how you in your research were able to really trace the negative impacts or implications from AI to these effects that you have shown. I don't know, I imagine that this is not so easy because you show e-waste, and I think it's multifactorial, and I think here in Europe, also I think in the way I act, there's this question of environmental impacts and how they are traced to AI, but I'm sometimes wondering how you really say it's AI. Wouldn't these effects not also be there with traditional digital electronic devices? Like, is it really AI that is causing these effects?
Thank you. That is a legit question. So it's an issue of methodology, right? So of course, the philosophy that I'm involved in, I don't go to the field to collect data. I rely on research, people's data that has been collected, and then I reflect on them. So what happened was that there's research generally on impact of digitalization on environmental, ecological issues or environmental degradation. There is also research on the impact of environmental degradation on women. There are calls, there's literature that is calling for separating how much of this impact of digitalization on on environments generally, how much of it is AI and how much of it is other, So yes, I think so far I have not seen the distinction made yet. So that is also a limitation. I have not seen that distinction. If you have found, I need it. It hasn't been done yet. But the issue is most digital devices now have AI kind of operations on them. Most. From our laptops to our phones to our centers, they're now moving into, because AI is part of the digitalization revolution, right? So I admit that clear distinction is not there. But if we're saying that these devices are what AI relies on to operate, then the impact of this device on the environment can be attributed to AI. This is the claim that I'm working with. But I admit that it's so far not been done, distinguishing between how much of it really goes into just digital devices that do not have anything to do with AI and then AI-related devices. So that is the method that I used.
It's a tough question.
Sophia's working on it.
You're okay. I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, so give it one more time up for Modestha. There will be a lunch buffet in the kitchen. We have 1 hour for lunch, so please be back at 2:15 and have a great break. And thank you all for the active participation and all the questions. It's been great so far.
You're so strict.
Sorry.